Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to our Meet the Manager Town Hall meeting here in Ridgewood. My name is Keith Kasmark. I am the new village manager, and I started here back on July 10th. This is week 11 for me, and excited to be here tonight. We have a small group with us here in council chambers and a few members who are participating via Zoom, and hopefully some people at home watching as well. Feel free at any time tonight to join in on the Zoom link if you do have questions that you would like to ask remotely. I want to start by just introducing myself, giving a little background. I grew up in Woodland Park in Passaic County, attended the public schools there, a high school graduate from Passaic Valley Regional High School. Went on to pursue my undergraduate degree in education from Syracuse University, and then completed my master's degree from New York Institute of Technology. During that time period, I ran for local office, really piqued my interest in local government, and from there have really made a career out of public service. I spent 12 years as the municipal clerk and the administrator in the borough of Elmwood Park, right here in Bergen County. Then moved on and spent 2 years in the township of Parsippany out in Morris County. And then for 3 years, I had the opportunity to lead my hometown on a full-time basis as both the mayor and as the business administrator before arriving here this summer in the village of Ridgewood. I must say that this experience has been tremendous. Ridgewood is a very special place. It has a lot of charm, a lot of tradition, and a lot of history that I am proud to be able to celebrate with the residents here and also with our dynamic staff that we have here in Village Hall and throughout the village. We do have our share of challenges, and there are a number of things that we've already hit the ground running. One, this summer we aggressively pursued road resurfacing, not only through the efforts of our engineering department with our village initiative, but also in partnership with PSE&G, who recently came in and installed new gas main in certain areas of the village. And then a big win for us was partnering with the County of Bergen to pave both Godwin and Linwood Avenues, which are two county roads, but very heavily traveled roads here in the village. And we really worked hard in partnership to make sure that those roads were resurfaced and ready to go before the start of school. So that was one of the first things that we tackled during the early months, during the early part of the summer, so that we knew we were ready for Labor Day. We are also in the process right now of redesigning our village website. This was another top shelf issue for the village council. Even during the interview process, the website was one of the things that we discussed, and I'm very happy to report that at last Wednesday's council meeting, the village council did award a contract to a company called Civic Plus. They are a group that has redesigned and launched municipal websites, not only here in New Jersey, but throughout the country. We're looking forward to working with them and relaunching our village website here in Ridgewood by January 1st of 2024. I also want to acknowledge in the audience tonight our Director of Water Operations, Rich Calby. He and his staff are doing yeoman's work in addressing the concerns about PFAS here in the village. We will have 12 PFAS treatment facilities up and running by 2026. And we broke ground at the Ravine site, which is over on Goffel Road near the Hawthorne-Wyckoff border just a few weeks ago. We were able to pursue a federal appropriation through the efforts of Congressman Gottheimer. We cut the ribbon on, or we broke ground on that facility, and we look forward to breaking ground and cutting ribbons on each and every one of them until this plan is complete. One other issue that I want to discuss is communication and transparency. These are two things that are extremely important to me. They've been important to me during all my years in public service. I believe strongly in letting the residents know what their local government is doing each and every day. And that's why I've launched 3 different social media accounts, one on Facebook, one on Instagram, and one on Twitter, so that we can keep the residents informed of what's happening here in the village. And I think it was a great tool, especially during our road resurfacing initiative, to be able to let residents know what street closures were going to happen, what detours were going to need to take place with the help of the police department, and really keep the residents informed each and every step of the way. There are so many incredible events, activities, initiatives that happen here in Ridgewood. People ask me all the time, what is the one thing that you find unique about the Village of Ridgewood? And I must say that the engagement of the residents is second to none. And it is a gift. It is actually a gift to this community that folks want to be involved, they want to be informed, they want to volunteer, and they want to just make this a special place to live and for me to work and to raise a family. So that is, without question, the largest impression that I've observed since I've been here is the engagement of the residents who want to be a part of what takes place here in Ridgewood. With that, we do have a couple folks in the audience. Do you have any questions? Let me give you the microphone. Thank you, Dylan. Okay. If you could just state your name too.
Yeah. It's Hans-Jürgen Lehmann, and I live at 234 Union Street. And the question I had, one of the issues I wanted to talk to you about was that the last administration, that would have been when Mayor Newsom was on the council, towards the end of her term, she kind of handed a gift to the uniformed services of the Village of Ridgewood with a contract, a very generous contract, with a retroactive payout for the previous 2 years. And I think in part that was responsible for the 4.8% increase in our property taxes that we have had to suffer. And I was just wondering, what's your opinion on that, and what will happen down the road in terms of those kinds of things?
So first, let me say that any contracts that were negotiated before my arrival will be honored. And in fact, we are in the process of working with our labor attorney as we speak to update all of the settled union contracts as the transition played out between myself and Heather Maylander, who I consider a friend and I've known for years. We served together on the Municipal Clerks Association of New Jersey together, and I consider Heather a friend and a colleague, and she's been tremendous help to me and an asset to this village during this transition. But any of the contracts that Heather negotiated will be honored. We're in the process of updating all of the contract language, including the PBA and the FMBA. But I will tell you this, while all labor contracts do have an impact on the municipal budget, there's no denying that. I think the two major issues that resulted in the challenge of the 2023 municipal budget were, one, the $2.6 million in federal aid that was received from the Biden administration, and many municipalities throughout the state of New Jersey used those funds to offset tax increases in both 2021 and 2022. Yet that money was not available to municipalities in 2023. So before the chief financial officer and the village manager even sat down to plan out the 2023 budget, we were already behind the 8 ball by $2.6 million, which we were not receiving in revenue from the federal government. The second issue that was a challenge was a 22% increase in state health benefit costs, which is a significant number for 1 year. The fortunate thing is I don't think that we will see that type of increase in state health benefits in 2024. I think the state has announced somewhere between a 7% and 8% increase in those costs, which when you have a 2% budget cap is still not ideal, but it's better than a 22% increase. And now that we've plowed through in the spring of 2023, putting this year's budget together, and a lot of folks, and Rich will tell you, we've tightened our belts here in order to get past that lack of over $2 million in revenue for this year's budget. I think 2024 will be a little bit less of a challenge. I don't think that it'll be a utopian budget. I don't think, we got through this year and now all the problems are solved. But you won't have those two hurdles of the lack of federal revenue and the 22% increase in state health benefits. So that's how I would diagnose the preparation of the budget.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But I'm not going to let go of it that easily, if you don't mind. I know
that's
there are other people who want to talk to you, so
No.
maybe you want to let them go and...
No,
and-
you can
yeah.
continue. Feel free.
Okay. So, I have an issue with the amount of money that we pay to uniformed services, especially police officers, okay?
Okay.
Now, the last time that I was able to Oprah salaries for Ridgewood police officers was either 2019 or 2020. I don't remember exactly. But there were people in the police department making $280,000. That was the highest paid police officer, was not the police chief. And I know some of that comes from overtime, but you're making, you know, the person was making something like $180,000 as a police officer salary, and then another $100,000 in overtime, you know? And that's just like, you know, I used to be the assistant trial court administrator for Bergen County. So I did a whole lot of stuff around unions and negotiations and whatnot. And at some long ago past in my life, I happened to be the union president for the probation officers union at the time. And I learned
So
one...
you know what it's like on both sides of the
Oh, I
bargaining
do.
table.
I really do. So the one thing I learned in all of that was that police officer contracts are like the best thing going in the state of New Jersey. I mean, they are hard and fast on what goes to the membership of the police union, you know. And it's just like, I feel like we're sort of like spending ourselves silly sometimes. And not just in Ridgewood, but I meant in general, you know, especially after 9/11. I used to be the security liaison for the sheriff's office in Bergen County, and I saw like salaries just skyrocket after 9/11. And we're very security conscious. We want to have security. We want to be able to call 911 and have a police officer show up. But I feel like it's just having this like serious impact on the budget of municipalities, including Ridgewood. You know, so I don't know that you can do anything about it. But
Well, I
it is a
can't do
major concern.
anything. Let me say this: I can't do anything right now. What I can tell you is that police officers probably have a rich contract. I mean, that's generally they're the higher paid employees within a municipal operation. That's not a judgmental comment in any way. It's a factual comment when you look across the state of New Jersey and you break out the cost of employees. Uniformed officers, both on the fire and the police side, although many municipalities don't have paid fire. But they are, you know, they are usually the more lucrative of the contracts and have the biggest impact on the municipal budget. But again, that's not unique to Ridgewood. I'll also say, and you know, I've said this across the bargaining table and I've said it publicly, I would not want to be a police officer today. I don't know that I would have ever wanted to be a firefighter because they're running into burning buildings as we're running out. But you know, being a police officer is not easy today. It's not an easy job. The public has a lot of scrutiny towards police officers, a lot of skepticism. Some of it I think is very unfair. But when it comes to how it affects the municipal budget here, I've already started to read through that contract because again, it's being updated from the prior negotiations, hoping to have all of those contracts signed in the next few weeks so that we can just move forward collectively. And I believe an employee should have a signed contract in front of them so that they can refer to it during the time that that contract is in place. However, when we go into the next round of negotiations, then I will have an impact on being able to see how we can make changes in the contract that not only benefit the village, but also benefit the taxpayer. Because there's an operational piece to it, there's a tax implication to it, and then there's making sure that we also value our employees. So those are the three pillars that I'll walk into a negotiation with, but I can certainly tell you that the contract will be looked over and we will find areas that we can focus on those three items. The one thing I will tell you when it comes to negotiations, I stand very fast on the fact that we have a 2% budget appropriation cap. Salaries and wages are not outside, even for public safety, are not outside the cap, they're within the cap. So we need to always be mindful of that 2%. The other thing that I have never touched in the history of negotiating contracts since it's been in effect is what's called Chapter 78. And that's the piece where the employee contributes a portion of their health benefit costs to offset. It would not be something that I would be willing to negotiate. I'll say that publicly. I've met with all the unions since I've been here already, and I've pretty much told them that that should be their expectation for the future. Health benefits, very, very expensive piece of our municipal budget. And I contribute to my health benefits. My other department division directors who are here tonight, they contribute to their health benefits as well. I believe that the employee has to have some skin in the game when it comes to healthcare costs. And I agree with the spirit of the law when it was implemented by, the Corzine administration and then later adjusted by the Christie administration.
Thank you.
You're welcome. How are you, sir? Have any questions? Have any questions?
We know each other.
Good to see you.
Floor is yours if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Welcome to New Jersey and welcome to Ridgewood. I don't know how long you've had your experience other than what's been printed, and of that we can believe half of what is printed. So thank you for your time here this evening, and I had a long list of questions to ask,
Okay.
but they're time consuming and I expect you will address them. I am a little concerned, though, about the transition that's ongoing for the Village Ambulance Corps to the Fire Department.
Okay.
It has needed some reorganization for a very long time. I was an active member for 3 decades, from 91 to...
Thank you for your service.
You're very welcome, thank you. But I didn't join for the gold or the glory, just the good. And a lot of that has been dissipated over the years. Now that it's, I understand, a part of the fire department, the sooner it is 100% reorganized and incorporated, the better. What is your projection on that?
So, can I just get your first name too?
John, and the surname Pepitro.
John.
P is Peter, A another P, I-E, T is Tom, R-O, and I am a resident for more than 30 years as well. Unless you require, I prefer not to give a mailing address. Or
No, that's okay. That's okay. John, it's nice to meet you. Let me say that I just last week had a meeting with Chief Judge from the fire department, who, again, another outstanding department head.
Excuse me a moment. I know Chief Judge because he was a probationary member on my ambulance corps.
Well, there you go. So you taught him everything he knows, right?
Well, a good part of it. He came with good training.
So the chief and I just had a meeting last week about this very subject. And obviously, like anything else, transitions can be bumpy. We are actually sitting down with the volunteer aspect of the ambulance corps within the next month or so. He's arranging that meeting for me so that we can sit down and sort of smooth out the issues that we have the ability to do so with regard to this transition. I could tell you that ambulance service throughout the state of New Jersey, and this is my 4th town where I've served as the administrator, now the manager, we've experienced this across the board. The solution, however, is different in each municipality. Some municipalities are able to move from a volunteer operation in-house to a paid operation in-house with the municipality having limited involvement. Here, we have a paid fire department. So it seems to me, and I've only been here 11 weeks, but it seems to me that it made sense to move it under that umbrella. But we need to make sure that the jurisdiction and the responsibility and who's covering what schedules, we need to make sure that that is collectively decided and that it's etched in stone moving forward so that we all know where each other stand. And that's the objective of the meeting with the volunteer folks.
What were the other 4 communities that you were in, if you may? I know the
Sure.
most recent one, but
So I started my full-time career in public service as the clerk administrator in the borough of Elmwood Park, which is here in Bergen County.
I was born in Patterson.
There you go.
And moved to East Patterson 2 years later, so I know that I grew up in that borough.
There you go. Do you remember Mayor Mola?
I do remember the name.
I worked for Mayor Mola. He was mayor for 46 years.
Yeah, how
God,
could you not know?
God rest his soul.
In fact, I think he lived on a corner house right on Broadway.
Yep.
Used to
Yep.
paint it red and white.
So I don't exactly know what they do in Elmwood Park now. I can tell you that when they transitioned in Parsippany from the volunteer squad over to a paid squad, there was a completely new department developed in Parsippany to provide ambulance service to the residents. So while I was there, I actually had a chief of ambulance service who reported directly to me as the business administrator.
Okay,
In-
I'm not asking about what the ambulance corps issue was, I just was
Okay.
curious which communities you were,
Those
from, where your previous experience was.
Elmwood Park, Parsippany, and then most recently I was the mayor, and I also served as the business administrator in Woodland Park, where I currently live and where I grew up.
Very good, okay. The issue with the ambulance corps that concerns me is that will it be one department and the ambulance simply be a division of that department or some designated section of it? Or is there some concern about whether or not there should be some separate and combined? Because at the moment, there isn't.
Right.
Speaking directly from experience, I've seen the change in volunteer service over the years. And as you have alluded, many communities simply do not have that gene pool of people who have the interest, let alone the time, to respond 24/7. After hours, weekends, holidays, more people have been in town, including Ridgewood. So when the volunteer group was working well, that was the best window of coverage. But for a decade, the last decade, I was operational. During the day was very difficult, which triggered the involvement of the fire department. The first chief, you might have heard his name, Bob Greenlaw, incorporated the help of the fire department during the working day because there just was not enough.
Sure.
Mr. Greenlaw also started the paid per diem program that worked well when the call count was 500 or so a year, 600. When I left, it was more than 1,700. And it was for a variety of things, not just medical, but medical-related injuries, things like that.
Sure.
So the volume went up exponentially, but the available service didn't. And one of the issues that came to my attention many times during my 14 years with local Boy Scout, Cub Scout groups and all the families I spoke to, they knew I was a resident and a member of the Corps, and they kept asking, my gosh, you have so much equipment. Why is that? And so I explained, well, the volume and the activities we answered. But the issue that not many people knew was that hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment in that garage, and I mean hundreds of thousands of dollars, was staffed by one person during the day.
Right.
How does that answer? And that was reported time and time again to village council. Look what we're doing, look what's going on, what we do. And nothing. So some changes happen, but more by default than design. And so now my interest is public safety and has been since I took up becoming an EMT and in the village of Ridgewood. And I see that as a large area that invariably will be expensive to address.
Sure.
But you might have already read that Ridgewood, from its very inception, had a full-time police department and a full-time fire department. That was day one. So if public safety is not intrinsic in this village and a cornerstone of its operation, what else is?
And if you talk to the folks on the EMS side, they across the board, everywhere I've been, they always felt like they're the forgotten group, right? One of the questions that I was asked already tonight was the contracts and the cost of police officers and firefighters. You know, not many municipalities have paid EMTs. Some do now because the volunteers just couldn't sustain the operation. Volunteer squads couldn't afford if they were purchasing the rigs and the equipment. You know, the overhead was just too great and the volunteerism was decreasing, and this is the situation that we're in. What I do wish would happen is I wish that the state legislature and the governor would take some action to support EMS and ambulance squads throughout the state. And I don't have the answer to what that looks like, but we do get support with fire grants and police grants to offset all different types of things. We really don't see that on the EMS side. And that's troublesome because in many cases, I don't want to say in most cases, but in many cases, ambulance response could be contingent upon life or death. And I experienced that myself. In 2005, on the Sunday of Labor Day weekend, my father had a massive heart attack on the side of my parents' house. And if it weren't for the quick action of the EMTs who responded and 2 police officers who were trained to use a defibrillator, he wouldn't be with me today. And if that ambulance took longer to get there because of a delayed response, because of a lack of volunteerism, he might not be with me today. So I'm very sensitive to this issue. When I served as mayor, I often received complaints early on in my term about the time frame in which it took for ambulance to respond. So here, it seems to me that it was a natural fit to move those responsibilities under fire, because as you said, from the inception of the village, we've had paid fire. We just need to make sure that the structure makes sense and that the chief of the department is comfortable with the operations that now fall under him. And I can tell you that you have a commitment from me that those meetings will be happening soon, and we're going to announce that structure that people can take solace in is going to be able to service the village for years to come.
Understandable. The cost of all municipal services, any and every department, is an issue for any community to address.
Sure.
Ridgewood is 125-something years old now, and so these expenses have been progressive from day one. The issue that I see is that not enough focus on prioritizing what the village of Ridgewood needs, what the residents as a group need, has been addressed by council for the last 2 decades. And everything else that comes up, sure, it should be given some consideration. Listen, review, discuss. But that last word I have heard for decades. We're talking, we're talking, we're talking.
Well, what I can tell you, I've only been talking for 11 weeks, so give me a shot. But what I will say is I've been trying really hard to talk to not only the staff here, but also the residents about the role and function of the manager's position. Right? The manager is responsible for managing personnel, managing daily operations, making sure that all the functions of the departments and that the ordinances within the village are being carried out. The village council has the obligation to set policy, to set the municipal budget. And a budget is really, in my mind, a list of priorities. Because what's going to make the cut when you're sitting down in budget meetings is going to be what's important to the 5 people who sit behind me on Wednesday nights. That's their role and function. And then it's my job and the department director's jobs to carry that out each and every day and execute those priorities. But I can tell you, I don't know anyone I've talked to, and certainly no one in the village of Ridgewood, who does not see ambulance response as a top priority when it comes to trying to make it work here in the village.
I understand completely. I mean, that's a given. But I'm also currently a member of the Zoning Board of Adjustment.
Okay.
Was under the authority of...
You had a late night last week, didn't you?
Say again?
You had a late night last week.
Yeah. Well, you know, the meeting is scheduled from 7:30 till 11, but when there is a line of people who want to make comments, especially about a complex application,
Sure.
then it's agreed among the board members. And the chairman spoke for us in that regard. We just, by all means, you came to speak, you can at least ask questions. It's a question and comment section, as you know, and
Sure.
the comments won't come until the whole application is presented. So my volunteer time is of some matter of record, but I don't seek any recognition for it. So right now, the issue is what is or isn't priorities, and that needs to be made clear to the village residents. The budget delineates what is happening, but it's not necessarily informative. It's just numbers, text, this is what's going on, but we need to know how you got to that situation. Now, that could be a very long report to your desk, but some consolidation of that on the website, maybe even by direct letter to residents who may want that. This is what we're doing. Now, the communication of the managing bodies of the village, the governing bodies as they are, and the departments Everything is on the website. But I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here when I say electronics has permeated our society. Everybody's using electronics, but nobody's communicating. The plethora of emails and messages and texts, and it just piles up.
Sure.
So by the time you get to that, if you even use it, so I'm suggesting now on a number of issues, the central business district safety and operation is abysmal. I walk when I can, because I can, into the village where I live, but every time I drive, I constantly see U-turns, jaywalking, people dragging children with them, adults crossing the street anywhere they want, anytime they want. And not far behind them, a gaggle of young boys and girls. This is happening everywhere I can see. But why do we not have more control over that? And there's one reason, quite simply, is does anybody even know or care about pedestrian regulations and safety as well as vehicular regulations and safety? I heard it all the time from my members of the Cub Scout and of the Ambulance Corps members that where are the police? Where are? I said, well, they're everywhere in town. But it's a two-way street, no pun intended. And when I walk into the village and see people just make U-turns and walk across everywhere and anywhere, I'm thinking, I learned in grade school, cross at the corner, not in between, even with the light. And there's so much of this just open disconcern. And that's a big issue to address, but what do? You can't police people directly, but you can inform them. I've suggested to both the police and fire department previous chiefs, a public safety letter is needed from the police about what is or isn't the requirements, responsibilities of pedestrian and vehicular traffic. Print it out, simple, one page, maybe two. I also went to the fire department when I continued to hear, well, it's so expensive. There was people over the years that I've been a resident, why do we have this fine? They wanted to get rid of it, make it volunteer. Right. So I said, wait a minute, do you really know what they do? And I said, no, I'm with them, I service with them. This is what we do, 12, 15, 1,600 calls a year. Everything from a flooded basement to a house fire. I said, that's a long list of things.
Sure.
Plus, they didn't realize that between the ambulance corps and the fire department, there's training available to the residents. I volunteered my time to teach first aid and CPR classes to everyone in Ridgewood. And I did it to my Cub Scout, Boy Scout, I did it village employees, I did it for fire, for police as needed. Now there are other people in police and fire department that do the same thing I do, but we're a small number. So when it comes to public safety, the big issue, and the one word in my mind, is education.
Sure. People
in it, involved in it, like yourself, you know of it, but the public either does not know or it's not a concern until they're the ones under the bus or the ones that get hit because somebody didn't stop before they made a right turn on red. I can't tell you how many times I answered those calls and it never works out good for the pedestrian.
Sure. So let me say this. First and foremost, one of the areas that I really want to improve upon here in the village is communication. I think we need to do more outreach. I think we need to sell some of the really great things that happen here on an annual basis, large projects like we talked earlier about that the water department and engineering department are undertaking. We need to do better in letting people know. And I'll tell you, in today's day and age, and maybe it's unfortunate, but we need to oversaturate. We need to really keep putting things in front of people so that it penetrates and they start to think about it. And one of the things that I think we can do with the police department and the fire department is educate people about how to be safe. I could tell you that Chief Lyons and I drove around for about an hour and a half on the first day of school. We wanted to see what that operation looked like. I could tell you that tremendous amount of families walk their children to school, even now, but on the first day of school, the numbers were even higher. Police department works with our crossing guard company to make sure that all the corners that necessitate a crossing guard, that they're covered, that those people are well trained. I can even tell you that I watched a training session in the parking lot where the company was here actually training the crossing guards. It was actually sort of a fascinating thing to watch. But you're right. We live in a society today where a lot of people, whether they're driving or whether they're walking across the street, and there's no telling whether they live in Ridgewood or they're just driving or walking through here, where they think they're the most important person doing the most important thing at that particular time. And that's what causes people to, drive in an unsafe way, to walk across the street without being guided by a crosswalk, and all of those different things. But you're right, there's two ways to address this: education and enforcement. So we need to penetrate and get those communications out there to people, and we also need our police department, which I have found them to be extraordinarily proactive. There's not one thing that as the manager I've gone to the chief or one of the officers and said, can you help me with this, because I think this is important that we do. They've not said no to me yet. So I think that we have the opportunity to take advantage of some of those things.
I understand completely. You've brought up a very good subject that is a serious one for all the years I've been in town and has become worse. The traffic around all of the schools. It's a traffic nightmare. I mean, it's so bad that there are lines of cars with one person and one child delivering. Well, if there's no other way to get there other than walking, how are you going to do that? I suggested to previous school board members and the leader, manager of the school board.
Superintendent.
No, not the superintendent. I mean, I did speak to them, but the
Business administrator?
members of the board and their various responsibilities. They said, did anybody hear of carpooling? This is a village where we know our neighbors, perhaps, or most, or many. How about just beginning something like that? Make it volunteer, of course. And the Home and School Association. I was the manager of that Crossing Guard Association. I was hired on to be the designated manager for that company. I didn't stay beyond the first year because I found it to be so poorly managed and badly administrated that I was calling on the police to get people to fill vacancies that occurred. Now, that wasn't a reflection on the guards themselves. It was a reflection on the transition from what was a village-maintained operation that was given to a vendor. And that process, you may have this experience yourself. I have it from 3 decades in the automotive industry on the manufacturer's level. And every time I saw a dealer and a dealer principal go to a vendor for something, the first thing they gave up was the cost of that operation. The second thing they gave up was all control over quality and scheduling, and then the quality of that service. Now, if you wanted more from that vendor, no problem. Here's the next higher price. We'll give you more.
Sure.
So vendors didn't address the issue. They just moved the item to a different area of the balance sheet. And so when I listen and hear that vendors are used and the village uses them, villages may use them for one reason or another, there's value there if you read the fine print. Why does the village, with a full-time fire department and any number of retired police and fire, people who may be very well able and interested to continue public safety in the community they serve, why do we not use more of that resource? Those retired policemen and firemen may be more than willing. In fact, the crossing guard operation was a part of the police department.
It was.
So if it was moved out for lack of personnel, okay, headcount in both those departments has always been.
The one thing I can tell you that the chief indicated to me, and I think it was actually the first day of school when we had this conversation, he did tell me that the absenteeism or the lack of coverage, the ability to get substitutes and that type of thing, has been dramatically reduced. So we have more coverage on the street corners under this private vendor, utilizing this private vendor, than we did before. So that gave me some comfort as a positive. Now, we have not sat down and weighed out the the pros and cons, so to speak, of using the vendor, but as far as I could tell, the chief was pretty satisfied with their services.
I understand. And just because it may be working doesn't mean it's working as well as it could. And when you look at expenses and you start prioritizing, can we do this in-house just as good, if not better? And how can we control those costs? And so that is an area that I think any vendor service that the village uses what's the benefit here? Before you
Sure.
decided to go to a vendor,
I'm listening.
what, if anything, was done to keep that in-house and simply expand for the future? What I've seen as a resident over 30 years is a lot less decisions that focused less on strategic, long-term issues and more on tactical response. Oh boy, what are we going to do with this problem now? Well, first we have to address it, but second is, why did it happen?
Sure.
What brought that about? And I don't see that kind of depth of concern, approach, management, evaluation, and that's where a lot of issues with Ridgewood exist. It was started as a full-service community. We're in a valley, and we have our own water supply. I'm telling you, the quality of water, just from my simple perspective of it, has changed dramatically from when I moved into the village. I can see, I can smell the difference in the water. I can taste the difference in the water. And it wasn't me who said that. Because of all my community involvement, the people in the organizations I work with brought that to me. They said, John, did you see this? Did you realize this? I said, yes, I did, and I reported it.
Right.
So it seems to me that every area of our village now, and I say our village because it needs to be presented to the residents as a group. We are all residents. No one is individual here. We're all part of a community. So if we don't think what we do has some effect on our neighbor,
Sure.
not just our neighbor across the street, but on the other side of town, then you have some thinking to do.
Right.
It is a community where everybody should be looking at how the village invests the time and effort of staff and the cost that goes along with that. And when you build quality, depth, service coverage, police and fire need backup people. They need personnel to handle normal rotation of service, plus what happens when there's illness or injury and there's vacations. I haven't seen a head count in the police or fire department that's commensurate with the recommended guidelines from union or state. I don't know how the village comes up with minimums when I see people having to work multiple overtime to fill. Now, I'm glad to do that. I'm glad to pay that. I appreciate that as a resident. And I salute the police and fire department, who I know firsthand for 3 decades. They do more in this community than I've seen many places else I've traveled. Not
Very,
just
very
in-
proactive. Very
Yeah, and
proactive.
I see that across the country. In my automotive career, I went to every state in this union, and all the major cities, multiple times. And I spoke to people. And now that I'm on the zoning board, in my capacity as a factory representative, I spoke with dealer principals, local community leaders about changes, facilities management, expansion. So I went through all kinds of plans, with professional planners, architects. And I listened to what they were facing in their community. I came back here, and I said to the various managers over the years, gee, I heard this here, I heard that. Oh, that's very good, thanks, we'll look into it. Nothing. So you have an awful big job to do. By the way, in the village where you live, or the town where you live, I think one of our very good village managers still lives there. Does the name James Tenhold mean anything to you?
I don't believe he's in Woodland Park.
He was, or he was
Was
in
he?
that area.
Okay.
But he was the last.
I do know James Tenhold, though.
You do know him?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, well then there you go. So he was one of the last ones I spoke to. After that, I had less success
Okay.
getting to speak to anyone, or whether it was council people or any others.
Well, I can tell you that I hand out my cell phone number, so you won't have any trouble finding me. And I respond to my emails. Rich knows I try really hard to respond within 24 hours to everyone, including the residents. So if you do have suggestions or thoughts, I'd be glad to hear them and have you share them with me.
Well, I certainly do, and they are a litany of what I've shared over the years. I'm very glad to see you here this evening. A little disappointed that the turnout is limited, but take a lesson from this. Your posting was readily available everywhere. So how we reach the residents needs to be multiple avenues. Print, email, every other way. I volunteered to speak at the Home and School Association groups for all of the schools because I spoke to many of them when I was the crossing guard supervisor.
Okay.
Not one took me up. I asked many of those people, do you know what a safe corridor is for school children? Blank faces. They have no idea. And so it's critical for families to know this is the safest way to get to that school if you're walking.
Right.
Now, if you're driving, I was confronted by school principals when I asked them, what can be done? What do you see as some way to help you with traffic flow? The response? It's the supervisor's problem. Really? I said, you're the principal, and there's a backlog down the neighborhood every morning. Worse in the winter weather when there's snow and there's less access. I said, don't you have anything that you can tell me? Because I'm the crossing guard supervisor. My staff saw that. I'll be happy to transfer that to the people who should hear it. Supervisor problem. I even had a crossing guard chastised by a school principal because he wasn't directing traffic. And the first thing that you're taught in that state-required class for crossing guards is you stop people, not traffic. So I mentioned that to the principal. That was the end of the conversation.
Well, like I said, my door is always open. If you have ideas or thoughts and
Very good.
they need to be shared with our department directors or our supervisors, I am more than happy to
I know
be
the avenues.
the catalyst for information. So
And so if you're going to be the conduit, you will see more of me.
very good. Thank you, John.
You're very welcome.
Dylan, do we have anyone online? No? Okay.
Yeah, I was neglectful at the beginning. I really want to thank you for doing this. You know, this is the first time that we've had a village manager who has had, I guess, meet the village manager. I don't know what you want to call it. So that's like a breath of fresh air in many ways. So I have another issue which is not really necessarily in your purview, but I think it affects all of us. And it's, you know, a kind of a sickness about the land, which is how we treat each other. And, you know, I was at the Wednesday Village Council meeting. You see what goes on. You see how people are polarized and how they speak to each other, not always in a very flattering way. And I feel like, I don't know what the answer to this is, but the answer in part for me lies in that we all need to do our best to listen, to hear what people have to say. We may disagree with them, but we should certainly disagree with them constructively and politely. And that is not what is happening, you know. I don't know if you read the blogs in this town. I would advise you not to, because they're just murderous. I don't read them at all, but my wife looks at them, so I get them through her, you know. And, you know, it's just like, there's such a mean-spirited thing going about. And you would think, you know, this is Ridgewood. When I go meet people outside of town, I like to go bowling, so I meet people that don't necessarily live in Ridgewood. It's always like, oh, you live in Ridgewood, that rich town. You know, it's like, it is a rich town. I mean, no question about that. But the way we treat each other is certainly not reflective of our economic status. You know, it's just god awful at this point. I mean, it's, you know, not to make a big thing out of it, but it was, you know, somebody took what is essentially public information about a resident of Ridgewood and put it out on a blog for everyone to see who's got an axe to grind about whatever. And it's just like, I don't know how you as a village manager, I mean, I love the way you conduct yourself. You're very professional. I really appreciate the way you speak and the things that you have to say.
Thank you.
You know? But the other issue, I mean, you may not want to address it. I said what I thought I needed to say, but maybe you can contribute a little bit to that.
So let me say this. First of all, there is a specific role and function that I provide at a council meeting. At the public meeting, it's really limited to the village manager's report. At the work session, a major function there is to guide the council through the requests of the various departments that come through me to them, mostly for appropriations, sometimes on policy and operations and things of that nature that are within the village council's purview. So even in both situations, I have a limited scope of responsibility at a council meeting. On a grander scale, I worry about what our children are seeing. And I don't mean that just here in Ridgewood, I mean that nationally at the state level. We've lost a level of decorum and respect just in society. And as someone who was elected at 23 years old, which is relatively young for someone to be elected or become an elected official, I can see the difference between then and now. I can tell you that from my perspective, my office will treat anyone who walks through the door with respect. In many cases, or in some cases, even if they don't treat us with respect, we will respond to them with respect. I've also started to speak to our department directors and our staff at large about the fact that I require any resident, any individual, they don't even have to live here, who reach out to them to receive a response, okay? Doesn't necessarily need to be the response that they want to hear, but they deserve the respect of a response from the village. And that's a non-negotiable for me, because I really believe that we're here to serve the residents, and one of the functions of our service is to provide answers to people. I could tell you that I had a situation where I had a resident who had sent 2 or 3 emails to myself and to the Parks Department, Shade Tree, about taking down a tree in front of their house. The tree was 100% not in the municipal right-of-way. It was further up on that person's property. They insisted, because there were some trees planted in succession, probably 60 years ago, that constituted it being in the municipal right-of-way, but it was too far off the curb line. So I had to tell this person, no, that was my responsibility. And in a respectful way, we did. That person didn't agree with me, they didn't like my answer, but they deserved the respect of knowing the position that the village was taking on their matter. So if, in my limited capacity, and how I can impact things here in the village, that is how every resident, regardless of whether we agree or disagree on an issue, and hopefully we can agree to disagree in those situations, but we do some with decorum and tact and respect.
Well, let me applaud you for that. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Dylan, do we have anybody else online? No? Okay. All right, well, thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate the opportunity. I can tell you that I may take a page out of the new superintendent of schools playbook, Mark Schwartz. He's been doing online town hall meetings. I think he calls it Coffee with the Superintendent. So as we get further into the fall, I think we may try to do this again, maybe an online version, a hybrid option of Meet the Manager, so we can sit down and continue this discussion, which I think is important because, again, I've been here 11 weeks, and my biggest priority right now is just to learn Ridgewood, and we're going to continue to do that, and I hope we'll do that together. And as I said, anyone who wants to follow our social media platforms, feel free, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and feel free, again, call our office, use my email address, which is kcasmark@ridgewoodnj.net, and we'll be glad to continue this dialogue and be able to continue to help the residents here in Ridgewood. So, thank you, everyone.